Welcome to Collections Management for Community Archives, a training session developed by the Community Archives Skills Support and Sustainability Project, funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund. I'm Robin Sampson, the Community Archivist for the project.
I'm Laura McCourt, Community Archives Project Manager.
By the end of this session, you should understand why collections management is important and how you can create a collections management policy document. You will learn about the accession process and the information required to transfer the ownership of a collection from a donor to a community archive. You will learn the basic procedures for appraising archive collections to ensure they are suitable and relevant to your community archive. You will also learn practical tips for creating a box list for a newly accessioned collection. The term collections management refers to the standards and practices that are required for the development, storage, and preservation of archive, museum, and local history collections and other cultural heritage material. A community archives collections management policy should enable its reason for existing, whilst also ensuring the long-term safety, sustainability, and accessibility of the collections under its care. To accomplish this, a community archive should develop a collections management policy that provides information explaining the specific needs of the collection. Collection management policies are specific to each community archive. The policy should note what happens if and when an object should be acquired for or removed from the archive, who can access the collections, and the preservation needs of items within the collections. A collections management policy will help you make decisions about your community archive and ensures that everyone in the group is working towards the same goals. It will also act as a tool to help continue the work of the archive in the long term. A collections management policy can have the following sections, which we will talk about shortly: mission statement, collecting statement, access statement, and preservation statement. Before starting, decide who will draw up the document and work together with your group to agree what you'll include. You're unlikely to cover everything on your first attempt. Date each version of the document as you update it so that you know which is the latest version. The collections management policy document should be published on your website, if you have one, so that users can read it. Mission statement. A mission statement answers the question, what do we do? What is our purpose? It has the types of items collected and what is done with them. Keep your mission statement short and to the point with 1 or 2 simple sentences. You can see an example of the suggested format on this slide. Your mission statement can be added to the About Us section of your Community Archive website, if you have one. Here's an example. This is the Norfolk Record Office's mission statement, which reads, "We collect and preserve unique archives relating to the history of Norfolk and make them accessible across the world." Collecting statement. A collecting statement sets out what is collected by the archive. It allows you to focus your time and resources on the items that are most important and relevant. It also helps you to say no to items which fall outside of its scope. A collecting statement includes the types of items you want to collect, for example, original documents, photocopies, books, objects, digital copies of documents, or digital photographs. It should also include the themes or topics you want to include, for example, agricultural practices, the geographical area you want to collect from, for example, the local parish. You should also note any exclusions, what you do not wish to collect and why. For example, material that doesn't relate to a particular village, or official records that should be held by a record office, such as school logbooks. You may also wish to exclude records in formats that you cannot access, such as Betamax tapes or cassettes. The collecting statement should include methods of acquisition, whether it's physical material, digital material, or both. It should include the terms of acceptance. These are the conditions under which you will accept archives. Will you take in loans, gifts, or both? You should also consider how you will manage records that contain sensitive information or personal data that may have to be placed under access restrictions for a time. And finally, the collecting statement should set out what will happen to the records if your group ceases to exist. Here is an example of a collecting statement from the website of the Thamesmead Community Archive. As you can see, it sets out what it does collect, that is, materials relating to the history of Thamesmead, specifically from the time of its construction onwards, and in a digital format if possible. And also what it doesn't collect, such as materials which relate to the heritage of the Royal Arsenal. We'll take a moment to let you read through. Access statement. An access statement sets out where and how your archive items can be used and by who. It should include details of where and when items can be viewed, for example, in a space looked after by the Community Archive or on your Community Archive website. Restrictions, for example, you may wish researchers to only view copies of certain archives because the originals are too fragile to handle. It should also include a note that each item will have particular conditions of access listed in their catalogue descriptions. For example, if an item can't be viewed because it contains sensitive information. And it should also include your Community Archive's contact details, so people can get in touch with questions or inquiries about viewing the archives. It is best to have an organizational email account for your group, which more than one group member can access, rather than using someone's personal account. Here's an example of an access statement. It sets out where, when, and how collections can be viewed, and whether in person or online. It states where access restrictions and conditions are displayed. It lists the Community Archive's contact details. And we'll take a moment to let you read through. Preservation statement. A preservation statement sets out how you will look after the archive's collection items. A preservation statement includes a description of where and how the items are stored, the steps taken to keep them safe and secure, a list of key holders with access to the storage area, a description of how you will maintain access to fragile or damaged items, for example, through taking digital photographs. And finally, a list of best practice guidelines followed by the archive to ensure the ongoing preservation of the items and/or types of material that are a priority for you to preserve. Here is an example of a preservation statement. It tells you where and how the items are being stored and how they are being kept safe, and who has access to them. It tells researchers how they can access fragile or damaged items, and it sets out what preservation guidelines the Community Archive uses, with links to the guidelines. We'll take a moment to let you read through. Things to consider before taking in a collection. It won't be possible for you to include everything that is offered to you in your archive. When you are offered items, consider the following questions before you decide to take them in. Firstly, do the items you are being offered fit your collecting statement? If not, you have two options. 1. Decline to take them in and refer the donor to your collecting statement. Or consider rewriting your collecting statement so that these and similar items offered in the future fit your policy. The document does not have to be set in stone. Secondly, you should ask, do you have the resources to look after them? If you do not have the resources to take in and manage the items that are offered, you may need to turn them down. This might be because you do not have the right equipment to make use of them. For example, a modern computer will not be able to show the information on a 1990s floppy disk. Or you do not have the physical or digital space to store them. Or an item contains sensitive information and you're not confident you can keep it secure and confidential. or they require special storage environments and handling. You should then consider whether they should be offered to another collecting body. It may be necessary to direct donors towards another organisation, for example, if the items form part of a larger collection held elsewhere, or if there are official records which should go to a specified repository, for example, school records should go to a local authority archive. If you choose to decline items, you may be able to direct them towards another organisation. This might be your local record office, a local museum, or another community archive. Appraisal. Before taking legal ownership of new material, the first step is to survey it in a process known as an appraisal. An appraisal is a survey of the collections to determine its value beyond its original purposes. It distinguishes between records that have ongoing research value and those that have no further research value. Think about the historic and social importance that an item or collection of items could have. Who created it? Who used it? How was it used? And for what purpose? How will this affect the way that you look after the items and how you make them available? Could they be digitized for online exhibition or research purposes? Will you need to make copies of records if you think they will be a popular resource? An item's research value may change over time, and it can be a matter of opinion which items have research value. If there is no clear agreement whether an item should be kept, refer the issue to a professional archivist, which you can do by contacting the Norfolk Record Office at norfolk@norfolk.gov.uk. So now there is a short exercise. We have put up some examples of the types of records you might get in a new collection. Pause the video on the next slide and have a think about what records you would keep with the collection and why, and which you would remove, why, and what you would do with them.
Accessioning is the process of taking legal ownership of items. It is a formal commitment made by your archive to care for items in your collection, usually over a long period of time. Accessioning is different to cataloguing, which is the process of describing the items in your collection and the relationships between them. Accessioning clarifies ownership of material, records the source of the material and when it was received, records the donor's contact details, identifies what the material is and what you're going to do with it, provides the opportunity to transfer copyrights from the donor to the archive if they own the copyright, identifies broad access issues such as fragile condition, items which require equipment to read them, or the existence of personal data where sharing may cause substantial damage or distress. The process should be documented through an accession form and an accession register. An accession form is used to record the acquisition of an individual item or a collection of items. It is a legal title agreeing to the transfer of a collection's ownership, in this case from the donor of the collection to the community archive. You will need to create a form for your community archive to use. An example accession form can be downloaded from the Community Archives Toolkit on the Norfolk Record Office website. It's helpful to fill in the form in the presence of the donor or depositor to make sure the details are accurate. They should be given a copy of the completed form for their reference. An accession form includes the name, address and contact details of your community archive, and you can add your website if you have one, a unique reference number for each entry, which could be the group's initials, followed by the current year, then a consecutive number, the name, address and contact details of the donor or the depositor. It may also be useful to note the contact details of the donor's next of kin or executor if possible. The date of receipt, so when the documents are received. The date the item was created, if it's just one thing, or if multiple items, the date span the collection covers, for example 1950s to 1990s. The title of the collection or item, for example Helen Smith collection. The quantity and storage formats of material, for example 2 boxes, 3 folders, 5 CDs, and then a brief description of the contents, such as local history research, physical and digital photographs, digital film files, sketches, diaries, and notebooks. An accession form also includes information as to whether the item is a loan or a gift. In most cases, it's simpler if items are accessioned as a gift, as you have much more control over how they are managed. If you choose to accession items as loans, you will need to establish the terms on which the loan is accepted, the loan period. For example, if you're taking possession of a document for copying, this may be for a short time. We recommend short-term loans are no longer than 3 months, and these can also be referred to as temporary deposits. Liability. Make sure that the lender understands that you cannot be liable for loss or damage to their items whilst they are in your custody. It's a good idea to encourage collections to be donated as gifts, where the donor agrees their ownership is transferred to the community archive. Loans, also known as deposits, are given to an archive without their legal ownership being transferred. This often presents practical problems, liabilities, and potential costs, which can be very difficult for a small, voluntary-run organisation to manage. Sometimes digitising a collection and returning it is the best possible option if the owner does not wish to part with the originals permanently. Other options you may want to consider are a bequest or a purchase, where ownership is passed to the organisation. Transfer from within your organisation if you have different branches or areas of responsibility, so that ownership is retained by your organisation. Or temporary deposit, usually for the purpose of digitisation or exhibition. When accepting a new accession to the archive, you need to ensure that the person giving you the material is authorised to do so. For example, power over attorney over a relative living with dementia who are the actual owners of the collection. Have a name for the donor or depositor. It could be an organisation, an individual, family, estate of a deceased person, auctioneers, etc. If receiving from an organisation, make sure to get the direct contact for an individual. Try and get as many forms of contact as possible: address, phone, and email. Gather as much information about the collection as you can from the donor, either in person or via your email communications. This process is a negotiation with the depositor or donor as to what you can do with the items. Discuss what's open to access and copyright or licensing agreements. If records contain information relating to a living individual, could their release to the public cause substantial damage or distress? If so, apply restricted access for a defined time and assume people live to 100. Ownership of copyright is different to ownership of the records. The donor and depositor is not always the same as the copyright holder, so check what can be assigned. Copyright is complex and often misattributed. It's good to familiarise yourself with how it's applicable to archives and to apply caution when taking in a collection. Ask questions and do some digging. The accession form just allows the depositor to transfer copyright if they wish to. They don't have to. Ask permission from the donor to destroy unwanted records or to pass them on to another collecting organisation. The accession register. An accession register is an official record of each group of materials in an accession. It can be used to collate the information from individual accession forms. It provides number control, so you can see at a glance the reference numbers of each accession and track them. It can be a simple table created on a spreadsheet or in a bound notebook or ledger. It is useful to have it in both formats. If you haven't already got a register, you can enter your current collections into your new register retrospectively, recording information to the best of your knowledge. Add each new item or collection of items as they are accessioned into your archive. Here we have a register with information about a fictional accession added. A version of this is available to download from the Community Archive Toolkit. An accession register records much of the information collected in your accession form, starting with the unique reference number of the item or collection of items. In this example, we can see it is for the 5th collection received by Market Lengthwaite in 2020. The accession number is different to the catalogue reference, which individual items will be assigned when you get to the cataloguing stage. In addition to the information from your accession form, The register then also records the name of the person receiving the records, the location where the collections or items have been stored, such as shelf reference number, and lastly, if the accession is on loan, there's space to record the date it was returned. Note where you store the new accession. You can use a spreadsheet to keep track of what is kept on each shelf or in each cupboard. If necessary, indicate the number of parts, for example, part 1 of 5. This allows you to check if something has gone missing. Record this even if the initial location is temporary. It's good to have location control over your collection in case of an emergency situation, and so everyone knows where the accessions are stored, not just the person who received it. Once you've appraised and accessioned an archive, you still need to consider whether you have more than you need or if it will take up too much space. This is known as weeding. Think of it like removing the weeds from your garden and leaving only the plants that you want or that are useful to you. For example, if an archive includes a big pile of identical magazines or booklets, you only really need to keep 1 or 2 copies. The rest could be offered to another organisation, returned to the donor, destroyed, or used in a handling collection where items are passed around to audiences at open days, school visits, or other events to allow people to touch and interact with archive materials. You may want to formally record what happens to items that have been weeded, and this process is also known as deaccessioning. If you do not already have one, set time aside to make a quick box list, which is an inventory of the incoming accession. Box lists describe not just boxes, but also any containers of archive material, such as files, ring binders, volumes, packets and bundles, or the loose contents of drawers and cabinets. You can download an example box list from the Community Archive Toolkit. The box list will provide an overview of what type of material is in the archive, enable you to make a quick assessment of any issues with the condition of the material or any special storage that would be needed because of its format, for example, photographs, textiles, audiovisual or digital material. It will enable you to identify material that might be particularly important for research, to spot any material that might need special access restrictions, to quickly see what you have and how much, like stock control in a shop, and also check if anything is missing. Box listing is a useful step to take before cataloguing the accession, as you will have some background information of the collection and knowledge of what it consists of. This is especially important if you won't be cataloguing it straight away. When you start the process of making a box list, begin by ensuring you have clean hands and a clean, dry area to work in. Set aside some time when you will not be disturbed. Start by giving each box, volume or file a number. You can label boxes with pencil or with slips of paper inserted into the boxes. Never use sticky notes or labels on archival records themselves as they cause damage. Use slips of paper to label bound volumes. Make a table divided into columns with the following headings for your box list. Complete a line in the table for each box, volume or file in your archive. Starting with unit number, give each unit of archive material, so a box, file, volume or any other container, a number as you go, so you know how many you have and so you can check if anything goes missing. Give each unit a 3-digit number such as 001, 002, etc. Title. This is the basic title that describes your unit. Avoid repeating information that you'll also put in the box contents field. Extent. Try to avoid counting individual items and stick to how many boxes, files or volumes you have. If you find you have several relating to the same thing, create one entry and simply change the extent to the number of these you have. Contents. Give a very brief overview, 2 or 3 sentences, of what's being described. Include details of which kinds of records are included, such as correspondence, reports or photographs. Remember, your users can look at the actual items to get more information, and this is not as detailed as cataloguing. Dates covered. Include the date or date ranges that cover the items. The accuracy of the dates can depend on the information you have available. For example, you may have exact dates, month and year only, years only, an approximate year where you can write C and then the year which is short for circa, to say plus or minus 5 years of the date given, or just the century as a whole or part of it, for example, mid-21st century. Avoid putting undated, as you should always be able to identify at least the century in which the material is created. Notes or problems and condition. Use this field to note any initial comments on the condition of an item or anything else noteworthy, for example, whether it contains personal information that may affect its accessibility. Lastly, enter the location where it is stored. Now it's time for another exercise. On the next slide, we will show you examples of new accessions that have been added to a box list. Pause the video and think about how they've been listed. What do you think is good in each entry, and what do you think can be improved? Resume when you're ready to continue. Here are our suggestions to improve this box list. Starting with 001, Jim's desk is not a useful location. Will people know where that is? It doesn't sound like a suitable long-term location. Does this entry need a condition note added? Has it been left blank because there is nothing to note, or has it not even been considered? Decide in your group whether it should be filled out and if the condition is acceptable, and be consistent. Because the contents contains personal diaries, you could flag that this will need checking for personal data, and you could add this to the notes. Next up, we have black shoebox. This needs a more specific unit number. You might also question whether the entry has been filled out correctly. Looking at the location, the shoebox is recorded as being stored over 2 shelves. You should check whether the shoebox has been decanted into separate boxes, or if the location has been entered incorrectly. Looking at box 3 of 4, this can be a good unit number to ensure stock control. Just make sure you're consistent with the way of numbering throughout the list. This entry also has too much detail in the contents. Listing individual articles is something you would do in cataloguing rather than in box listing. Then we have 004. This entry is the opposite, and it's not detailed enough. You need to say the genre, so what type of material it is, and the subject as a minimum. You should also be able to put a century for the date, at least, rather than unknown. The last one is 009. This is so vague. Too little detail is given. If you can't identify what it is, does it have research value, or can it be weeded out? Box listing is about filling out the appropriate level of detail. If you were asked, do you have anything relating to, would you be able to tell? If you lost a box of records, would you know? Check your accession paperwork for additional information, or ask the donor for details if you can. Ensure you write the accession number and unit number on each container to identify it later. Here's our collections management checklist. Create a collections management policy, including mission, collecting, access, and preservation statements to help you make decisions about how your community archive is managed, and to ensure that everyone involved is working consistently towards the same goals. When you are offered a new item or collection, do an appraisal survey to check whether it fits with your collecting statement, whether you have the space and resources to look after it, and whether it would be more appropriate for another archive or heritage organisation. If you want to take in the collection, complete an accession form with the donor or depositor signed by both parties. Talk through it with the donor to ensure you get all the correct information and they are kept well informed. Keep one copy for your archive and give a second to the donor or depositor. Enter the details of the accession into your accession register. Go through collections and weed out any duplicates or material you think is not of research value. Make a box list for each collection of items so you have an idea of what's in the box or file, how much material you have, and any issues with its condition. Here are some links to further information about different aspects of collections management. The Community Archives and Heritage Group has a detailed resources section on different aspects of collections management. The National Archives has produced a checklist of what collecting statements should contain and an introduction to appraisal. We have also included links to example mission, collecting, access, and preservation statements. Thank you very much for watching. There is an in-depth reference section on collections management on our Community Archives Toolkit, and you can find this via the Norfolk Record Office website. Take a look at the Norfolk Archives Network forum to connect with other community archive groups. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us via the Norfolk Archives Network forum. We have a short feedback survey and a link beneath this video. This is really helpful for us to pass information on to the National Lottery Heritage Fund. It shouldn't take more than a few minutes. If you could please click on the link and fill it out, it would be much appreciated. Thank you again for watching.
Before we finish, here are some answers to the two exercises in this video. Exercise 1. Parish registers and tithe maps. These are records created by local government and should be deposited with a local record office. You may keep copies in your community archive. Box of checkbook stubs. These may have limited research value compared to how much space they take up, so you may wish to take a sample of them and dispose of the rest. 15 copies of the same local history pamphlet. You could keep 2 or 3 of these, one for the archive and one for display or for handling. The rest could be returned to the donor, offered to another group, or disposed of. Local pub sign. Again, this is a question of research value versus space available. You may wish to photograph the sign and offer the original to a local museum. Digital photographs. These should be kept if you have the capability to store them. They may also need to be assessed to ensure they comply with your collecting statement. Box file of invoices. Again, make a decision on its research value compared to how much space it takes up. 4 financial ledgers, 1 severely damaged. These could be kept, but ensure that the damaged ledger is copied and the original is properly packaged and not handled very much. You may wish to seek advice from a professional conservator. Box of videotapes and cassettes. This depends on whether you have the ability to access the formats. Consider the following. Could they be digitized? Do you know what's on the tapes and whether it's of significant research value? Do the recordings exist elsewhere? Exercise 2. Line 1. This item does not have a useful location. Does it also need any condition notes? What about personal information stored in the diaries? Line 2. This needs a more specific unit number. You should also check whether the line has been filled out correctly. As in the location, it says that 1 shoebox fits over 2 shelves. Line 3. Be consistent when numbering items in the accession. You should also consider whether the contents has too much detail in this. Should this be saved for your catalogue entry? Line 4. This has the opposite problem in that too little detail is given. You need to say what type of material it is and the subject as a minimum. You should be able to date it to a century at the very least. Line 5. Again, too little detail is given, and if you don't know what it is, how can you be sure that it is of useful research value and fits your collecting policy?